activities that were being located in Malaysia at that point in time was essentially final assembly type activities. And the best example of that is essentially the electronics industry, where essentially they do assembly and testing here, and about 85% of the components in terms of value add is actually imported. So although it's a very big industry, in terms of domestic value add, it's actually only 15%. So our failure is that we actually did not develop enough backward linkages to deepen the economic impact of all those sectors in which we had promoted foreign investment. So I'll give you an example. In Huing here used to work for an oil chemicals company. We can talk about this later. But we had palm oil, and because we had palm oil chemicals companies were clamoring to be located in Malaysia. So ExxonMobil, Henkel, which then became Cognis, and which is now Emery, Procter & Gamble, all wanted to come to Malaysia. And the Malaysian government said, okay, you can come to Malaysia, but our condition is that you must have a JV partner, 50% Malaysian. You must have you can only set up a 50-50 JV, and the other 50% must be held by a Malaysian entity. So Procter & Gamble, for example, JV with Felda, Cognis JV with Golden Hope, and so on. Now, actually, it was quite counterproductive, because what happened then is that those entities, because they didn't want to give up value to the Malaysian partner, essentially structured the operation such that the entity in which we had a JV actually captured minimal value, and had high cost pass-through, and they essentially sold the output to another legal entity where essentially all the high value add was being captured. So it became counterproductive. What we could have done instead is say that you can come here, you can own 100%, no problem, but we want you to actually collaborate with Malaysian Palm Oil Board, who at that point in time was called PORIM, and do a collaborative research project, which by the way we will co-fund, and at the end of the day we want to co-own the intellectual property since we co-funded it, and since you have all these networks and channels, you can monetize it, and we will ride the upside. So that would have been a way to actually develop the high-end skills, but we didn't do that. We had all sorts of complicated measures, and as a result, when we lose our cost competitiveness, and it doesn't make sense for these companies to be based here, they all want to be based in Indonesia, we actually don't have that high-end skills for them to say that, okay, we want to locate higher value-add activities in Malaysia. We don't, because all this while we never bothered to develop that. We were just, fixated by this, okay, give 50%, value, so to speak, to Malaysian entity. Establishment of large Malaysian conglomerates. I think this was a time period where government used tools such as privatization, licensing, to actually create the companies that today you know as TM, TMB, and so on. So this happened during that period of time. And I think that during that period also there was this experimentation in developing mega entrepreneurs, if you like. So we had the likes of Halim Saad, we had Tajuddin Ramli, and imagine we actually asked these people to borrow billions of dollars to buy over Musk, to buy over, what was the original name of Celcom? There was a name for Celcom before that, okay, before your time actually. Sorry? Was it? TM Touch, yes, absolutely. No, before that. Uniphone, okay, fine. And as a result, when the Asian, and you could only borrow against corporate equity if the market value of that corporate entity supported it. So what happened during the financial crisis, when share prices dropped, essentially you end up owing more to the bank, more than what the companies were. The Dana Harta had to come in, and Khazanah had to come in, and a bunch of institutions essentially had to come in and almost re-nationalize those assets. So moving forward, since we ended up with all those companies being in Khazanah's hands, Khazanah then embarked on this GLC transformation program, which I believe has been successful. And now we are re-experimenting with entrepreneurship, but this time we have a different model whereby instead of expecting entrepreneurs to leverage themselves to the hilt, we say, okay, it's okay, you don't have to leverage. You run this company as a professional manager, and based on your KPI, we allow you to earn in equity into the company. Rinos is laughing. You know who I mean, right, Rinos? So I think that we had good intentions. tensions. I think that the strategy of wanting to bring in FDI, the strategy of wanting to kickstart corporate Malaysia in itself was not wrong. But in the execution of it, a lot of things seriously went wrong. Yeah? Next. Okay, so next few slides is more elaboration in terms of some of the things that went wrong. So, Government of Malaysia actually, I think, cares about Malaysia a lot. We were very protective. So, if you look there were a bunch of market failures that the government was very concerned about, and we really wanted to protect the Malaysian public. So, we were scared that foreigners would milk our national resources and that Malaysians don't benefit at all. We were scared that foreigners would steal jobs that would have gone to Malaysians. We were scared that infant industries were not given a level playing field to grow, consumer rights would not be protected, and we were concerned that in some cases private investment just won't happen, because the private sector's risk averseness or just the sum of capital required will be too huge. So there were all these arguments used to justify interventionist policies. So what you see in the middle are some of the interventionist policies that were used. So the fact that we feared foreigners would milk our national resources and government would not benefit. We had this forced corporate equity thing where 30%, 50%, whatever it is, depending on what industry it's in, you have to give to Malaysians. Sometimes you have to give to Bumiputra. The concern that foreigners would steal jobs, we used to have, and we still have in a number of sectors, this ruling whereby before a company can employ an expatriate, we actually need JKPD permission. So even though you, the company, are bearing all the cost, of relocating this guy, paying him expat benefits, whatever, you still need JKPD to sign off on the fact that this job that you're giving to an expat cannot actually be done by a Malaysian. You're familiar with trade barriers, Proton, of course, being the main example of that. Direct government investment in business. There are a lot of those. So, so those measures by the government in turn led to government failure, which is the other extreme. As an economist, one extreme is market failure, the other extreme is government failure. So, among them, inconsistencies in applying government policy, corruption, lack of financial discipline, and then you had all these policies developed and all these laws developed during Tun Razak's time, which had the mental frame of government knows best and government needs to protect the rakyat. Then over the past, the next 40 years or so, you essentially, because of economic development and the fact that civil servant salary has not kept up, the private sector capability has clearly overtaken government capability. So you have all these old regulations being executed by people who don't really understand why the regulations were there in the first place and not equipped to actually update them. Yeah. Next. So what I'm trying to say here, weak support for gender entrepreneurship coupled with government-led setup of mega firms has led to industry fragmentation and poor level of institutionalization in local firms. So essentially, we could have taken, and this is an oversimplification, but we could have taken two approaches. One approach is essentially the Singapore approach by saying that actually, we just want to create an environment that is conducive to talent. We want to create an environment that's conducive to innovation. We want to create an environment that's conducive to entrepreneurship. So we put in place all the enablers, and once these enablers are in place, any business should be able to thrive. Yeah? The other approach, which is the Malaysian approach, which is, well, trying to build enablers is actually going to take too long. So we want to leapfrog. So we are going to take a shortcut, and that shortcut is we are actually going to jumpstart firms in a number of sectors which we think are big bets. So first it was heavy industries, so steel, got Purwaja Steel, and Proton, and whatnot. Then somehow it became ICT, so you had all these multimedia super corridor things. Then it was biotech. Then it was halal for a while. And I don't know what it is, yeah? So, okay, so, by the way, that is not necessarily wrong. That approach is not necessarily wrong. It could have worked, but I think why it didn't work is that we just so fond of trying to kill too many birds with one stone, I think. So, good example. Okay. So we want to create. We have all these oil resources. We want to create Malaysian participation in the oil and gas sector. So we say we want to have our own fabrication yards. Wonderful. We probably needed 2. Why create 30? Yeah, so how does that help? Yeah, so if we had wanted to adopt this top-down approach, we should have had discipline and say that the minimum level of operating scale is X. Because our market is of this size, we can only support 3 players. And if you want to come in, you actually have to take over one of these firms if they are underperforming. If not, sorry, we can't accommodate you. But for whatever reason, we were so nice, so accommodative, people datang, nak license apa, kasih lagi. So as a result, Petronas has licensed about 3,000 companies, which probably they only need 30 lah, I think. So that's the situation we're in right now. Okay. So yeah, fragmentation and so on. Innovation. So you can talk to Nate over here, Navin over there, who are very passionate about innovation, having just done a project on it. But essentially, what the project showed was that in Malaysia, there's very poor, the innovation ecosystem is essentially very, very weak, which translates to very few projects actually making it through from idea generation to profit making. The best and the top performing government research institution that we studied essentially only had 3% success rate from projects being funded to actually profit generation. So out of 100% of projects that they initiated, 10% were commercialized. From the 10%, 3% actually made it to profit generation stage. That's the top performing institution already, so everybody else is like half or worse on that level. So what do you need in terms of conducive environment for innovation? Well, what we see in other countries is that there is sufficient quality projects, or what we call this industry deal flow. Meaning to say that in the US, for example, you have very high quality scientists, because they have a good education system and people just like to go there. You have very high quality scientists, you have very high quality projects, which essentially are able to come up with a solid market value proposition. Yeah, that's point number one. Point number two, you also have an established fund management industry, whereby the people in fund management have domain expertise and they can tell whether or not a project is viable or not. So when you have on the one hand good projects, on the other hand funds which are being run by experienced professionals, then obviously it's easy to consummate a deal and to take it through the various stages. We, on the other hand, generally have very poor quality deal flow. Not many people know this, but based on a survey done by DOS, only 8% of entrepreneurs in Malaysia actually have a degree. Because all of you don't want to be entrepreneurs. In the US, you would be entrepreneurs. You would consider yourself a loser for actually taking a paid job. In Malaysia, you don't want to be an entrepreneur. Secondly is we are actually lacking in fund management capabilities. So every time Equinas, MathCat, whatever, try to come up with a fund outsourcing program, whereby we say, okay, we don't want to manage these funds ourselves, we think private sector to manage it. So why don't you all submit a proposal to manage part of these funds for us? You can never find enough people who would qualify. And the institutions, PMD being one of them, so finally you need to tell them, the involvement of institutions, pension funds, high net worth individuals in Asia is extremely low compared to our neighbors. So they all like the dividend storyline, they don't like the private equity growth story. So, if we had sufficient quality deal flow and established fund management capability, some investments would actually get made, which would enable attractive exits. So, for example, when Google exited, when Biogen exited, when all these companies exited, you get 1,000% type of returns. In Malaysia, you would struggle to get 10 times, 12 times returns. So, because we don't generate these kind of multiples, people are actually not motivated to allocate part of their financial portfolio to these sort of investments. So it's a vicious cycle kind of thing. And because of that, whenever people try to set up funds in Malaysia, if it's not government backed, it's essentially not going to have sufficient private sector commitment. And if you don't have scale, you essentially can't build domain expertise. If you can't build domain expertise and specialization, you essentially can't evaluate deals properly. Imagine if you're a generalist and you're trying to evaluate deals in biotech,